In a hidden hallway, tears fell silently on the freshly polished floor. The reunion of two lives separated by pain, exposed secrets buried for over a decade, an unexpected pregnancy reignited, a past many thought was behind them, and just when everything seemed lost, a choice emerged that would change everyone's fate. Before diving into this emotional story, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring tales of new beginnings. The empire had been built with discipline, precision, and sacrifice. The man who commanded the marble-lined corridors knew that every inch of that place was the result of tough choices and necessary sacrifices. Nothing, however, prepared him for the sight that greeted him as he turned the service corridor. Kneeling between buckets and cloths was she, the woman who had once been his partner, now pregnant, with eyes full of tears as she cleaned the floor of his hotel. Richard Miller froze for a moment. At 45, he had achieved what few could, transformed the small family hotel into a respected international chain with properties on 3 continents. His latest acquisition, the sumptuous Palm Palace, a historic hotel in the heart of Miami, represented the pinnacle of his career. But at that moment, all his confidence crumbled upon recognizing Helen Carter. The image was a punch to the gut. She who had once helped him review contracts, who had listened to him dream on sleepless nights, now wore a cleaning uniform, her hair tied back and her expression emptied of any vanity. Her belly, rounded beneath the loose fabric, revealed a new life. Surprise prevented any immediate reaction, but his once shielded heart faltered. "Helen!" His voice came out almost inaudible, as if he feared someone might hear. The woman raised her eyes, and the bucket she was holding slipped from her hands, spilling soapy water across the Italian marble floor. The liquid spread like an inconvenient truth between them. "Richard, she stammered, trying to stand, supporting her hand on her back to balance the weight of her advanced pregnancy. "What are you doing here?" he asked, still motionless, as if his expensive Italian shoes had stuck to the wet floor. The silence that followed was interrupted by a third voice. "Mr. Miller, the board is already waiting in the meeting room." It was Patricia, his executive assistant, who appeared in the corridor with a folder of documents. Noticing the scene, she stopped abruptly. "Sorry, I didn't know you were busy." "Tell them I'm coming." The response was automatic, his eyes never leaving Helen for a second. When they were alone again, Helen spoke first. "I didn't know this hotel was yours. I was hired by the outsourcing company 2 weeks ago. I never imagined—" "How far along?" he interrupted, gesturing toward her belly. 7 months. Richard made a quick mental calculation. It had been almost 3 years since the tumultuous divorce, 3 years since she had disappeared from his life without a trace, after a legal battle that nearly ruined him emotionally. The reunion brought back buried memories, shared smiles in empty rooms before grand openings, financial struggles, joint defeats. But there, among cleaning products and awkward silences, there were urgent questions. Why was she here? Who was the child's father? And why, among so many places, had she chosen this very one to disappear? "I need to get back to work," said Helen, bending down with difficulty to pick up the bucket and cloth. "If you want me to resign, I understand." "No." The answer came out more emphatic than he intended. "Finish your shift. We'll talk later. My office, 6th floor, at 5. With that, Richard straightened his tie and headed to the board meeting, where the purchase of a new property in Atlanta would be discussed. Throughout the session, his mind wandered to the service corridor. The numbers and graphs projected on the screen seemed nebulous, distant. He, who had always been known for his meticulous attention to detail, now signed documents almost mechanically. "Richard, do you agree with the terms of the proposal?" asked Maurice Allen, his minority partner and longtime friend. "Yes, of course," he responded automatically, only to realize he had no idea what he had just agreed to. At 5 o'clock sharp, after dismissing Patricia, Richard waited in his office. The glass walls offered a panoramic view of Palm Beach. It was there, between the sea and sky of Miami, that he had built his empire. And now, this same office would be the stage for a conversation that could shake its foundations. A soft knock on the door announced her arrival. Helen entered, still wearing the uniform but with her hair down, long and brown as he remembered. There was something different about her besides the pregnancy. A shadow in her gaze, a weight on her shoulders that hadn't existed before. "Please sit down." He indicated the armchair in front of his desk. Helen obeyed, visibly uncomfortable. For a moment they just looked at each other, like strangers trying to recognize vestiges of what they once were. "I never imagined we would meet like this," she began, breaking the silence. "When I was hired, the company name was different. I didn't associate it with your group. We made the acquisition 6 months ago. Not all employees were informed of the change in the holding company." "I see." She adjusted herself in the armchair, instinctively protecting her belly with her hands. "You look well, Richard. I saw your photo in the Business People of the Year magazine. Congratulations on the awards." "Helen, why are you working as a cleaner?" He went straight to the point, ignoring the congratulations. "You were the editor-in-chief of an architecture magazine. You had your career, your contacts." A bitter smile crossed her lips. "A lot has happened in these 3 years, Richard. Not everything went as planned." The answer came in a low voice, almost inaudible. The man who had gotten her pregnant was a feared name in the industry. Known for his aggressiveness in business and a past surrounded by sordid rumors, he was also Richard's biggest rival. According to her, after discovering the pregnancy, he began to stalk her, control her movements and threaten her. Fleeing was the only way out. Victor Campbell. The name came out like poison from Richard's mouth. "You got involved with Victor Campbell?" Helen nodded, unable to hide the shame and fear that the name provoked. "It was after an architecture event in Lisbon, 8 months ago. He seemed different from what people said. Charming, attentive." She paused, gathering strength. "When I discovered who he really was, it was already too late. I was pregnant, and he transformed." Richard stood up, unable to contain the agitation he felt. Victor Campbell wasn't just his biggest competitor in the hotel market. He was a man with dangerous connections, known for destroying reputations and businesses when crossed. Years ago, Richard had lost a property in Key West to him under suspicious circumstances involving falsified documents and witnesses who changed their testimonies overnight. "Why didn't you seek help, Helen? Why did you just disappear? And who would help me?" She stared at him with tearful eyes. "After the divorce, many doors closed for me. Do you have any idea of the power Victor has in this industry? He destroyed my reputation when I tried to end the relationship. In weeks I lost my job, my apartment." Richard sat back down, stunned by the revelations. "And now he's looking for you?" "Yes." The word came out like a sigh. "When he discovered I was hiding in Pine Hills, he sent people after me. I had to flee that same night with just one suitcase. I've changed my phone 3 times, moved 5 times. I work under a false name, pay for everything in cash." His gaze fell on her belly. "And the child?" "It's a girl." Helen smiled for the first time, a genuine smile that momentarily illuminated her tired face. "I'm going to call her Claire." "Does Victor know it's a girl?" "No, he only wants the baby to control me, not because he cares." Her hands caressed her prominent belly. "But I can't let my daughter grow up near him. Not after what I saw, what I discovered about his business." Something in her tone made Richard realize there was more to this story than a simple matter of an abusive relationship. "What did you discover, Helen?" She hesitated, looking nervously at the door. "I can't talk about it here. He has eyes and ears everywhere." Richard was about to insist when a message arrived on his cell phone. It was from Brenda, his current wife, confirming the time for dinner with investors that night. Only then did he remember. He was also expecting a child. Brenda was in her 5th month of pregnancy, and every day when he came home he caressed her belly, talking to the future heir of the Miller Empire. Divided between his new life with his current wife, also pregnant, and the past that was coming. Back to life, the hotel owner decided to protect her. He offered shelter, security, and silence. It was the least he could do for Helen, regardless of the troubled past they had. "I have an empty apartment in the corporate building next to the hotel." You can stay there while we decide what to do. No one but me has access. Not even the cleaning staff enters without authorization. I can't accept that, Richard. The embarrassment of today is enough. Helen tried to stand, but a contraction made her sit back down, breathing deeply. Are you okay? He asked, concerned. Just Braxton Hicks contractions. The doctor said it's normal at this stage. Doctor, are you getting prenatal care? Helen lowered her eyes. When I can. I go to different public hospitals to avoid creating a pattern, but it's been almost 2 months since my last appointment. Richard picked up the phone. Patricia, call Dr. Lewis Crawford now. Tell him it's urgent. And prepare the 8th floor apartment in the executive building. Bed linens, basic food, everything necessary. He paused. And Patricia, absolute discretion about this. No one should know. Understood? From across the desk, Helen watched him with a mixture of gratitude and distrust. Why are you doing this, Richard? After everything... Because no one deserves to live in fear, Helen, neither you nor the child. He hesitated before continuing. And because I know what Victor Campbell is capable of. If he's after you, there's a reason, and it's not just the child. The sun was beginning to set, painting the office with orange hues. Outside, the city was preparing for the night, oblivious to the drama unfolding on that floor. You're not alone now, affirmed Richard, more to himself than to her. What he didn't know was that by sheltering Helen, he had just become involved in a much larger plot, where secrets from the past threatened not only her survival, but the entire empire he had built with so much effort over the years. That night, as he prepared for dinner with investors, Richard made a phone call. The recipient was Carl Thompson, his head of security and former federal agent, a man of extreme trust. I need you to investigate Victor Campbell. Everything. Business. Contacts, recent movements, and Carl, he can't know we're keeping an eye on him. Understood, boss. Any specific reason? Richard looked out the window at the adjacent building, imagining Helen settled in the safe apartment. Let's just say it's a family matter. As he hung up, he knew he had initiated a dangerous game, but something told him that this reunion was no mere coincidence. Helen was keeping secrets that could change everything, and he was determined to discover what they were. The apartment that Richard offered Helen was more than a simple refuge. It was a fortress disguised as luxury. Located on the 8th floor of the executive building adjacent to the hotel, the space had a private security system, bulletproof glass and restricted access by an exclusive elevator. Few knew of the existence of that environment, initially designed to house foreign investors during delicate negotiations. Helen walked through the spacious living area with hesitant steps, as if afraid to break something merely with her gaze. The designer furniture, the view of the sea and the state-of-the-art electronic equipment contrasted drastically with the simple rooms in boarding houses where she had been hiding in recent months. The pantry is stocked for 2 weeks, explained Patricia, handing her a tablet. Through this device you can request whatever you need. Only myself and Mr. Miller will have access to your messages. Thank you, replied Helen, accepting the device with trembling hands. But I can't stay long. He'll find me. He always does. Patricia, a woman in her 30s with impeccable posture and a perceptive look, adjusted her fine-framed glasses. With all due respect, Mrs. Carter, Mr. Miller doesn't usually lose. If he has decided to protect you, believe me, you're safe here. When the assistant left, Helen suddenly felt alone amidst all that luxury. She sat in the white leather armchair, caressing her prominent belly. Silent tears rolled down her face as she contemplated how her life had changed so radically. 3 years ago, she was a respected editor-in-chief, married to a promising businessman. Now she was a pregnant fugitive, cleaning bathrooms to survive, carrying secrets too dangerous to share. Fate had a cruel sense of humor to bring her precisely to her ex-husband's hotel. The sound of her cell phone, a cheap prepaid one that she changed constantly, made her heart race. It was a simple text message, but it froze her blood. I know you're in Miami. I need the property deed. Final warning. Helen let the device fall, her hands suddenly numb. How did Victor always manage to track her? Was someone informing him? Her thoughts were interrupted by a discreet knock on the door. Mrs. Carter, I'm Dr. Lewis Crawford, Mr. Miller's personal physician. The improvised consultation revealed what Helen already suspected. She was anemic, with high blood pressure, and the baby was slightly below the expected weight. Dr. Crawford, a gentleman with graying hair and gentle manners, prescribed vitamins and rest, promising to return in 3 days. "You've been under a lot of stress. We need to monitor that blood pressure carefully," he commented, putting away his stethoscope. "And congratulations, the little one is strong despite everything. A fighter, like her mother." That night, for the first time in months, Helen slept, without startling, in a comfortable bed protected by walls that weren't made of cardboard. At the same time, miles away, Richard faced another type of tension. The dinner with Arab investors was taking place in the private salon of the hotel's starred restaurant. Among glasses of expensive wine and conversations about mergers and acquisitions, his mind constantly returned to the afternoon's encounter. "Richard?" Brenda's soft voice brought him back to reality. "Sheikh Al-Jabri is waiting for your opinion on the proposal." Brenda Adams Miller, at 35, was the definition of discreet elegance. Tall, with tan skin and impeccably styled black hair, she had built her own career as a renowned architect before meeting Richard. The navy blue dress she wore charmingly disguised her 5-month pregnancy. "I apologize, Sheikh. I absolutely agree that Key West would be the ideal location for the new development," replied Richard, resuming his role as the perfect host. Hours later, in their penthouse apartment, he finally revealed to Brenda the surprising reunion with Helen. "You put her in the safe apartment?" asked Brenda, as she delicately removed her diamond earrings. "I should have consulted you first, I know that." Richard poured himself a finger of whiskey. "But you should have seen the state she was in, Brenda. Pregnant, working as a cleaner, fleeing from that scoundrel Campbell." To his surprise, instead of resistance, his current partner showed compassion. Brenda sat on the edge of the bed, thoughtful. "Richard, you know I'm not insecure about your past with Helen. What concerns me is Victor Campbell. That man is dangerous." "I know." He swirled the amber liquid in the glass. "But I can't simply ignore the situation. Helen might be carrying crucial information about his business." Brenda stood up, caressing her own belly in an unconscious gesture of protection. "It's not just about business, and you know it. Victor Campbell has connections with people who don't hesitate to eliminate problems. If Helen knows something that could compromise him..." Richard placed the glass on the bedside table and embraced his wife from behind, his arms encircling both Brenda and the child she carried. "I promise I'll be careful, but I can't abandon her, not in these conditions." "Of course you can't." Brenda turned to face him. "Actually, I'm proud of you for helping her. We can offer protection that few could. We just need to be strategic about it." That night, together, the two devised a protection plan, using the resources of the empire itself to conceal the presence of the woman in danger. Brenda, with her experience in design, suggested modifications to the apartment for greater security. Richard, in turn, assigned Carl Thompson to discreetly monitor Victor Campbell's movements. What neither of them imagined was how quickly their plans would be put to the test. The next morning, Victor Campbell's luxurious office in Atlanta's financial center was a study in contrasts. The minimalist decor in black and gray tones reflected the calculating personality of the man behind the smoked glass desk. At 50, Victor Campbell maintained his physical form with the same discipline he applied to business. Perfectly trimmed gray hair, tailored Italian suit, and a Swiss watch that cost more than his employee's annual salary. His expression, however, didn't match his polished appearance. "What do you mean, lost her trail?" His voice, normally controlled, revealed growing irritation. The man before him, a middle-aged ex-cop with a scar on his chin, shifted uncomfortably. "She was in a boarding house in Bayside until Wednesday. After that, she simply disappeared. Her phone is still active, but we can't track the exact location." Victor twirled the gold pen between his fingers, a habit his associates had learned to fear. It was the prelude to drastic decisions. "That bitch has the property deed to Angel Bay. Without it, I can't finalize the sale to the Chinese. And worse, the deadline with the investors expires in 3 weeks. Sir, if I may, why not simply issue a second copy of the deed?" The look Victor gave his subordinate was icy. Because the original deed contains specific details about the acquisition that can't become public. Helen knows this. That's why she stole it before fleeing. I understand, sir. No, you don't. Understand. Victor returned to his desk, opening a folder with photographs. I have a child on the way, a legitimate heir. I can't allow that woman to ruin everything now. The photos showed Helen in different locations, leaving a medical office, buying groceries, entering a boarding house. The last image, however, made Victor narrow his eyes. Helen in uniform entering the service door of a hotel. When is this photo from? 3 days ago, sir. It's the Palm Palace Hotel in Miami. Victor Campbell froze, a smile slowly forming on his thin lips. Palm Palace, a property of Richard Miller. Exactly, sir. It seems she got a job there on the cleaning team. How interesting. Victor leaned back in his chair. Fate has a peculiar sense of humor, don't you think? Helen fleeing into the arms of her ex-husband. He opened a drawer and took out a yellow envelope. From inside, he extracted old documents and a photo of Richard and Helen together, in happier times. Increase surveillance at the hotel. I want to know every movement of Helen and especially Richard Miller. Victor paused, contemplative. And prepare the documents we discussed before. Perhaps it's time for a meeting with the board of the Miller Group. The adversary was persistent. He appeared without warning, demanding information, threatening to expose documents that, according to him, could destroy the hotel's reputation. The board was summoned, emergency meetings initiated. The accusations came accompanied by falsified records, contracts with altered dates and supposed testimonies, all to force the surrender of the pregnant woman. 3 days later, Helen was already beginning to adapt to the new environment. The safe apartment, initially oppressive in its luxury, had become a refuge where she could finally sleep without nightmares. Dr. Crawford's visit brought encouraging news. Her blood pressure had stabilized and the baby had gained weight. That afternoon she received an unexpected visit. The discreet doorbell announced not Richard, as she expected, but Brenda. I hope I'm not disturbing you, said the architect, holding a large basket covered with fabric. I brought some things I thought you might need. Helen, still uncomfortable with the situation, invited her in. The meeting between the ex and current wife, which could have been tense, surprisingly flowed naturally. Brenda had brought maternity clothes, special vitamins, and what touched Helen most, a small baby robe in pastel yellow. I didn't know. If you had already bought the layette, commented Brenda, instinctively caressing her own belly. I imagine you haven't had many opportunities considering... Thank you. Helen held the small robe against her chest, emotional. Actually, I only have 2 pieces that I managed to buy at a street fair. I couldn't risk using a credit card in large stores. The 2 women sat in the living room, sharing pregnancy experiences. For a moment, they almost seemed like friends. 2 future mothers discussing morning sickness and baby kicks. But reality soon imposed itself when Helen's tablet notified a message from Richard. Emergency meeting with the board. Victor Campbell has contacted the investors. Stay in the apartment. I'll send Carl to reinforce security. Brenda, who had also received the notification on her cell phone, frowned. It started earlier than we expected. What are you talking about? Asked Helen, suddenly alarmed. Victor is trying to use his influence to pressure Richard. Brenda stood up, taking her phone. We need to act quickly. It was then that Helen realized Brenda hadn't just come to bring gifts out of compassion. That visit had a strategic purpose. You've been studying me since you walked in here, Helen stated, unable to hide the accusatory tone. Wanting to know what I know, how much of a threat I am. Not a threat. Brenda maintained her calm. A resource. You have information that can bring down Victor Campbell, don't you? Helen hesitated, looking away. I have more than information, I have proof. Proof of what exactly? Of how he acquired the land in Angel Bay where he's building his largest resort. Helen stood up with difficulty. The previous owner didn't sell those lands voluntarily. Victor forged documents, bribed authorities, and when that wasn't enough, he eliminated the obstacles, completed Brenda, understanding the gravity of the situation. Exactly. And I have the original deed that proves the forgery, along with recordings of compromising conversations. Helen walked to the window, observing the movement of the city below. "He's not chasing me just for the baby, Brenda. He wants to destroy the evidence before I use it." Brenda approached, placing her hand on Helen's shoulder. "Why didn't you turn this over to the police?" A bitter smile crossed Helen's lips. "Do you really believe the police would confront someone with Victor's power? He has judges, sheriffs, and politicians in his pocket. That's why I ran. I was gathering courage and resources to leave the country before Claire's birth." The sound of the private elevator interrupted the conversation. Richard entered the apartment, his face heavy with concern. Seeing the two women together, he momentarily paused in surprise. "Campbell is making his move," he announced, loosening his tie. "He's called an extraordinary meeting with the board for tomorrow. He's claiming we have compromising documents that belong to him." "The deed to the land in Angel Bay," murmured Helen. Richard looked at the two women, realizing he had missed part of an important conversation. "What exactly is going on here? What are you two planning?" Brenda exchanged a significant look with Helen before answering, "We were discussing how to use what Helen knows to bring down Victor Campbell once and for all." It was at that moment, in that safe apartment with a view of Palm Beach, that three seemingly disconnected people formed an unlikely alliance: an ex-wife with dangerous secrets, a pregnant architect with a strategic mind, and a businessman determined to protect everything he had built. What none of them noticed was the almost invisible drone hovering outside the window, its high-resolution camera capturing every word, every gesture, every secret shared that crucial afternoon. In the control room of a commercial building, 2 miles away, Victor Campbell watched the monitor with growing interest, a satisfied smile on his lips as he listened to the conversation through advanced surveillance equipment. "So that's where you're hiding, Helen," he murmured to himself, zooming in on the image of his ex-lover. "And with evidence against me. How convenient." He picked up the phone, dialing a number he rarely used. "Prepare everything for tomorrow. I want no failures." The trap was set, the confrontation inevitable, and neither side imagined what fate had prepared for the next day. The next morning dawned with a sky heavy with dark clouds, heralding a storm that perfectly matched the climate. In the meeting room of the Palm Palace Hotel, around the polished mahogany table, the 8 members of the administrative board waited tensely while Richard Miller reviewed documents with his lawyer. On the other side of the table, Victor Campbell displayed a confident smile. Tall, with grey hair and a penetrating gaze, he wore an impeccable navy blue suit that contrasted with his artificial tan. Beside him, 2 serious-looking men carried identical black briefcases. "I thank you all for adjusting your schedules for this extraordinary meeting," began Richard, standing up. "Mr. Campbell claims to have something urgent to discuss with this board." Victor adjusted his silk tie and stood up with the studied elegance of someone accustomed to dominating environments. "Ladies and gentlemen, I regret bringing this delicate matter, but it is my duty as an ethical businessman to inform you of serious irregularities involving Mr. Miller." He made a gesture, and one of his assistants distributed folders to the board members. "What you have in your hands are copies of altered contracts, falsified property certificates, and, more worryingly, evidence of misappropriation of corporate funds." A murmur went through the room as the members leafed through the seemingly incriminating documents. "This is ridiculous," interrupted Richard. "These documents are clearly forged." "Really?" Victor raised an eyebrow. "Then how do you explain your notarized signature on this 2015 contract, where you admit to diverting resources from the expansion fund to cover personal debts?" Richard maintained his composure, although his tense jaw betrayed his effort. "This document is a gross fraud, as are all these accusations. But you didn't come here just to try to tarnish my reputation, did you? There's something else you want." Victor smiled, a smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. "Indeed, I'm willing not to take this evidence to the authorities if you hand over certain documents that were inappropriately removed from my property. Documents that, I believe, are currently in the custody of Helen Carter, your ex-wife who curiously now works at your hotel." The silence that followed was so dense it could be cut with a knife. The board members exchanged confused glances. Most, We're unaware of any connection between Richard and an employee. I don't know what you're talking about, replied Richard with calculated coldness. No? Victor took his tablet and slid it across the table. These images were captured yesterday in an apartment you own. On the screen, Helen was talking with Brenda in the safe apartment. The angle of the photo made it clear it had been taken from outside the building, probably by a drone. Richard's lawyer, Matthew Fontaine, a gentleman with white hair and a serene expression, leaned forward to examine the images. Mr. Campbell, are you admitting to having conducted illegal surveillance of private property? That's a crime under Article 153 of the Penal Code. Victor wasn't even fazed. No more criminal than harboring a woman who stole confidential documents from my company, documents essential for a multi-million-dollar negotiation with Chinese investors. This meeting is over, declared Richard, gathering his papers. If you have any legitimate complaint, Mr. Campbell, use the appropriate legal channels. I will not allow you to turn the board into a stage for your veiled threats. You have 48 hours to hand over Helen Carter and the documents she stole. Victor stood up calmly. Otherwise, not only will this evidence reach the police and the press, but also certain information about an incident 3 years ago. Richard froze, his gaze suddenly alert. What incident? Victor approached, lowering, his voice so only Richard could hear. The accident that put Helen in a coma for 2 weeks after your divorce. An accident that, curiously, was filed without a complete investigation. I have witnesses, Miller. Witnesses who can confirm your involvement. With that insinuation, Victor collected his folders and left the room, leaving behind an apprehensive board and a visibly shaken Richard. In the safe apartment, Helen was going through her own ordeal. Since dawn, irregular contractions had been bothering her. Dr. Crawford, hastily called, examined her with concern. It's not labor yet, but your body is giving warning signs, he explained, putting away his stethoscope. Your blood pressure is elevated again, and this can induce premature contractions. How much time do I have? Asked Helen, caressing her belly. If you follow my recommendations for absolute rest, we can delay the birth for another 2 weeks, ideally. Each day is important for the baby's final development. When the doctor left, accompanied by Carl Thompson, the head of security, Helen took the disposable phone she kept hidden in a drawer. She typed a brief message to a contact identified only as M. Need you to pick up the package. Soon. The walls have eyes. The response came almost instantly. Tomorrow. Usual place. Noon. Helen deleted the messages and put the device away again. Her contingency plan was in motion. Now she just needed to hold on for another 24 hours. When Richard returned to his office after the turbulent meeting, he found Brenda waiting for him. She was especially elegant in a structured black dress that disguised her pregnancy, her hair pulled back in a severe bun that accentuated her determined features. The board is in panic, she informed him without preamble. Maurice has already called me 3 times asking about Helen. Richard poured himself some water, his hand slightly trembling. Victor played dirty. He mentioned Helen's accident. What accident? Brenda frowned. Richard sat down heavily, rubbing his face with his hands. Something that happened right after our divorce. Helen was in a car accident, in a coma for 2 weeks. At the time, I was in Japan, closing the acquisition of the hotel in Tokyo. And what does that have to do with you? Nothing. But Victor insinuated that I have some involvement. He paused, looking out the window. What worries me is how he knows about this. Very few people know about this episode. Then came the first twist. The hotel owner revealed a secret he had kept for years. At the time of the divorce, there had been an accident that had put the woman in a coma. She never knew. But the incident had been caused by orders from her own father, involved in a corruption scheme and fearing exposure. The rival, now accuser, knew everything and was using the past as a weapon. Brenda, there's something I've never told anyone. Richard's expression became somber. Helen's accident wasn't accidental. I discovered this weeks later when a private investigator I hired brought me evidence. Evidence of what? That Helen's car was sabotaged. The brakes were tampered with to fail at high speed. Brenda brought her hand to her mouth, horrified. My God, Richard, did you report this? I tried, but the detective in charge filed the case as a common mechanical accident. Later I discovered he had been suddenly promoted and bought a beach house in Paradise Cove. Victor Campbell bought him off. No. Richard stood up, walking to a small safe disguised behind a painting. From it, he removed an old folder. It was Helen's father, Anthony Carter. He was a minority partner in the construction company that built my first hotels. He showed Brenda old photographs depicting an older man of severe appearance, talking with official-looking men. Anthony was involved in a scheme to overcharge for public works. Helen discovered compromising documents in his office and confronted him. She threatened to expose him if he didn't return the embezzled money. And he tried to silence her permanently? Her own father? The incredulity in Brenda's voice was palpable. Richard nodded gravely. After the accident, Anthony disappeared. Some say he fled to Paraguay, others that he was eliminated by concerned partners. Helen never knew this part. When she woke from the coma, I decided to spare her this horrible truth. And what does Victor Campbell have to do with this? He worked for Anthony at the time. He was his right-hand man in the corruption scheme. Richard put the photos away again. If he knows about the accident, he probably also knows about Anthony's involvement. Brenda processed the information in silence for a few moments. Helen needs to know this, Richard, especially now. I know. He ran his hand through his hair, visibly tense. But how do you tell a pregnant and vulnerable woman that her own father tried to kill her? The phone interrupted the conversation. It was Carl Thompson, the head of security. Sir, we've detected suspicious activity in the perimeter of the executive building. 3 unknown men in a black car are circling the block for the 3rd time. Reinforce security, and don't let anyone in without my express authorization. Richard hung up and looked at Brenda. Campbell isn't going to wait 48 hours. He's moving now. We need to get Helen out of here, concluded Brenda, already taking her phone. I have a contact, a friend who runs a discreet private clinic in Pine Hills. We can transfer her today. It's risky to move her. If Campbell is watching the building, more risky is keeping her where he already knows she is. Brenda quickly typed on her cell phone. I'll go to the apartment to prepare Helen while you organize security for the transport. As Brenda was leaving, Richard received another call, this one from an unknown number. Miller speaking. Mr. Miller, you don't know me, but I have information about Victor Campbell that may be of interest to you. The female voice on the other end sounded tense, almost whispered. My name is Marianne. I worked as his personal assistant for 2 years. How did you get this number? Helen gave it to me. I'm the person who's going to pick up the package tomorrow. Richard felt his heart accelerate. Helen had a parallel plan that he was unaware of. What package? What are you talking about? The original documents, the recordings, everything. That can bring Campbell down. Helen doesn't keep anything in the apartment except copies. The originals are in a safe deposit box at Fisher Island Airport. Why are you telling me this? A brief silence preceded the answer. Because Victor discovered about tomorrow's meeting. He has people following me. A noise of metal hitting interrupted the sentence. I need to hang up. Be careful with the lawyer. He's not who you think he is. The call dropped, leaving Richard with more questions than answers. Which lawyer? Matthew Fontaine, who had represented him for more than a decade, or someone else? As he tried to make sense of the fragmented information, his gaze fell on a framed photograph on the wall, the inauguration of the first hotel in the Miller chain. In the image, besides a younger Richard cutting the inaugural ribbon, was Anthony Carter smiling proudly next to his then son-in-law, and partially visible in the corner of the photo, a familiar face. Victor Campbell, 15 years younger, observing the scene with an indecipherable expression. The truth was beginning to take shape, a truth that connected past and present in ways Richard could never have imagined. With legal support and evidence obtained in silence, the businessman was preparing to dismantle the accusations one by one, revealing the true face of the enemy before the board and law enforcement agents. What he didn't know was that at that exact moment, Helen was going into premature labor in the safe apartment with only Brenda to help her. The rain finally came down on Miami, turning the streets into small rivers and the sky into a grey mantle that swallowed the skyscrapers. In the safe apartment, the situation was as stormy as the weather outside. "Breathe deeply and try to relax. Between contractions," instructed Brenda, firmly holding Helen's hand, who was lying on the bed, her face bathed by a thin layer of sweat. "It's too early," Helen managed to say between labored breaths. 7.5 months. It's not safe." Dr. Crawford, who had returned in a hurry, checked her vital signs with a worried expression. "The blood pressure continues to rise. If we can't stabilize it, we'll have to deliver now." "Can't we take her to the hospital?" asked Brenda, wiping Helen's forehead with a damp cloth. "With this storm, traffic is completely stopped." The doctor checked the portable monitor he had brought again. "And even if we could get out, it would be risky to move her in this state." Helen grabbed Brenda's arm with surprising strength. "Marianne, the meeting, documents," she murmured, before a new contraction silenced her. Brenda leaned close to her ear. "Richard already knows she contacted him." A slight relief passed over Helen's contorted face. Then her gaze fixed on the window, where raindrops ran down like tears. "He found us, didn't he? Victor is out there." Before Brenda could answer, the apartment door opened and Richard entered, completely soaked, followed by Carl Thompson. Their grave looks confirmed Helen's fear. "3 black cars have surrounded the building," informed Richard as he approached the bed. "Armed men." Carl identified at least 5. "I called reinforcements from the security company," added Thompson. "But with this rain, they'll take at least 20 minutes, Dr. Crawford interrupted. "We don't have 20 minutes. The baby's heart rate is fluctuating, and Helen's pressure continues to rise. I need to perform an emergency C-section now." Richard paled. "Here? Without hospital facilities?" "I brought the essentials in my bag. I've performed deliveries in worse conditions during humanitarian missions." The doctor began to organize his sterilized instruments. "But I need assistance and an environment as clean as possible." Brenda immediately took control. "Carl, bring all the clean sheets you can find. Richard, we need to boil water and set aside towels." She took off her jacket and rolled up her sleeves. "I'm trained in advanced first aid. I can assist the doctor." As everyone mobilized, Helen held Richard's arm, her gaze suddenly clear and focused despite the pain. "If something happens to me and my daughter, promise you'll protect her." Richard held her hand between his. "Nothing is going to happen. You're strong, Helen. You've always been the stronger one between us." "Promise," she insisted, with an urgency that went beyond the present moment. "I promise." The words came out like a solemn oath. For an instant they weren't ex-husband and ex-wife, but 2 people united by a history that not even time had managed to completely erase. The moment was interrupted by the ring of Richard's phone. It was Matthew Fontaine, his lawyer. "Richard, I got a protective order against Campbell. The judge granted our request based on the evidence of stalking and threats. The police are being notified as we speak." "Excellent work, Matthew." Richard moved away from the bed to continue the conversation. "We also need an ambulance. Helen has gone into premature labor." "Labor?" The lawyer's voice sounded strangely alert. "Where exactly are you?" Carl Thompson, who was passing with the sheets, stopped abruptly and gestured for Richard to hang up. When the phone was silenced, the head of security explained in a low voice, "Sir, Marianne contacted me 10 minutes ago. The lawyer is compromised. He was seen leaving Campbell's house last night." "Matthew, impossible. He's worked with me for over 10 years. "Everyone has a price, sir, and Campbell knows very well how to find it." Thompson showed his cell phone with the photo he had received, Matthew Fontaine leaving a mansion in Bay Harbor, shaking hands with Victor Campbell. Richard felt his stomach sink. The betrayal was too deep to process at that critical moment. "Carl, go down and check the lobby security. Don't let anyone up, especially Matthew." He took a deep breath, trying to organize his thoughts. "And send someone to intercept Marianne at the airport before she falls into a trap." As Thompson left to carry out the orders, Dr. Crawford was already preparing Helen for the procedure. The apartment, once a safe refuge, was transformed into an improvised surgical center, with Brenda assisting in organizing the medical instruments. "I'm going to apply the local anesthesia," explained the doctor. It's far from ideal, but it's the safest under the circumstances. Helen nodded, her eyes fixed on the ceiling as she murmured something that seemed to be a prayer. Brenda held her hand, offering words of encouragement, while Richard observed the scene with a mixture of fear and helplessness. The moment was interrupted by the shrill sound of the intercom. "Mr. Miller," it was the voice of the building's doorman, visibly nervous. "There's a group of men down here insisting on coming up. They say they're police, but don't let anyone in," ordered Richard. "Repeat, no one comes up without my express authorization." "They're very insistent, sir. One of them says he's your lawyer, Dr. Matthew." The intercom suddenly went silent, followed by the distant noise of a door being forced. Richard ran to the window and saw 3 men in suits entering the lobby of the building, while the doorman tried to stop them without success. He immediately recognized Matthew among them. "They're in," he informed, pulling out his cell phone. "I'll alert Carl." In the improvised room, Dr. Crawford had begun the procedure, with Brenda at his side, passing instruments as requested. Helen bit a cloth to contain her moans of pain, as the local anesthesia offered only partial relief. Richard sent an urgent message to Carl, then returned to check on the progress of the delivery. "How is she, Doctor?" "We're almost there." The doctor worked with absolute concentration, his hands moving with impressive precision considering the circumstances. "The baby is positioned correctly, but the umbilical cord is wrapped around the neck. I need to be very careful." Suddenly, the sound of the elevator arriving on the floor echoed through the external corridor. Richard exchanged alarmed looks with Brenda. "Keep helping the doctor," he instructed, as he picked up a gun that Carl had left on the table. "I'll buy time." "Richard," Brenda's voice trembled slightly. "Be careful." He nodded, heading for the door. He checked the gun. It was loaded, but he hoped he wouldn't need to use it. He positioned himself strategically beside the entrance, tension making each second an eternity. Footsteps approached down the hallway. Richard breathed deeply, preparing for the confrontation. The doorknob turned slowly. In the room, a thin, high-pitched cry cut through the air, the first sound of Helen's daughter born amid the storm and danger. "It's a girl," announced Dr. Crawford, lifting the newborn small and pink. "She seems healthy, despite the prematurity." Brenda took a clean towel to wrap the baby, tears of emotion rolling down her face. Helen, exhausted but conscious, extended her arms to receive her daughter. "Claire," she murmured, touching the delicate little face with trembling fingers. "My Claire." The moment of tenderness was brutally interrupted when the apartment door exploded, sending shards flying inside. Richard was thrown against the wall by the force of the explosion, the gun escaping from his hands. 3 men entered, Matthew Fontaine in the lead, followed by 2 burly security guards with weapons drawn. "Where is Helen Carter?" demanded Matthew, his voice cold as ice. "Victor Campbell has pending business with her." Richard, dazed but still conscious, tried to stand up. "You betrayed my trust, Matthew. Why?" "Business is business, Richard. Campbell offered a partnership I couldn't refuse." He gestured to the security guards. "Check the rooms." The men advanced through the apartment, soon finding the room where Helen held the baby, with Brenda and the doctor at her side. Dr. Crawford positioned himself protectively in front of the bed. "You can't come in here. The patient has just undergone an emergency cesarean." One of the men pushed him violently, causing the elderly doctor to fall awkwardly against the table of instruments. Brenda screamed, placing herself between Helen and the intruders. "Don't come any closer, she's weak, losing blood." Matthew entered the room, assessing the scene with calculating eyes. "So the heiress has finally been born." He approached, ignoring Brenda's resistance. "Victor will be pleased." Helen pressed her daughter against her chest, her pale face marked by fierce determination. "I will never hand my daughter over to him." "You have no choice," Matthew signaled to one of the men. "Take the child. Be careful. It's a premature baby." The security guard advanced, but was surprised by Richard, who appeared at the door with a raised chair, hitting him violently in the back. The man fell, while the second security guard pointed his gun at Richard. "Don't be stupid, Miller," warned Matthew. "You're at a disadvantage." A deafening bang echoed through the apartment. For a moment, everyone was motionless, until Matthew looked down and saw the red stain expanding on his chest. He staggered, incredulous, before collapsing to the floor. At the bedroom door, Carl Thompson held his gun pointed, with 3 more uniformed men behind him. The second security guard immediately lowered his weapon, surrendering. "The police are coming up," informed Carl. "The real police, with an arrest warrant for Victor Campbell for attempted kidnapping, extortion, and fraud." Richard ran to Helen's side, who was shaking violently, still holding Claire against her chest. Dr. Crawford, recovered from the fall, was already checking her vital signs. "She's going into shock," he diagnosed gravely. "We need an ambulance. Immediately." Brenda was already on the phone, her voice firm despite the terror of the situation. "Ambulance on the way, 3 minutes." As the storm began to subside outside, Helen looked at Richard with eyes half closed from weakness. "The documents... Marianne..." "Don't worry about that now," he whispered, holding her free hand. "Focus on staying well. For Claire." But Helen insisted, her voice almost inaudible. "Safe deposit box 237, combination, date of our first meeting." Her eyelids fluttered and closed, while Dr. Crawford worked frantically to stabilize her. Little Claire, oblivious to the chaos around her, slept peacefully in the arms of her unconscious mother as ambulance and police car sirens approached, cutting through the silence that followed the storm. The private hospital in Bay Harbor was a temple to silence and discretion. In the corridors of the VIP sector, only the occasional tinkling of medical instruments or muffled footsteps interrupted the artificial quietness. Richard observed through the glass of the neonatal ICU, where Claire, connected to tubes and monitors, fought for each breath inside the incubator. So small, so fragile, and already carrying the weight of secrets she didn't even comprehend. 7 months and 35 weeks, informed the doctor, consulting the chart. Despite the prematurity, she's responding well, lungs still immature but developing adequately with the help of respiratory support. "And Helen?" The question came out as a tired whisper. The doctor adjusted her glasses, her face assuming a more serious expression. The hemorrhage was significant. The trauma of the situation, added to the pre-existing high blood pressure, complicated the situation. "We managed to stabilize her, but she remains unconscious." Richard nodded mechanically, as he had been doing since they arrived at the hospital 12 hours before. Words like hypovolemic shock, blood transfusion, and induced sedation floated in his mind without fully connecting. "Mr. Miller?" The doctor's voice brought him back to reality. "You should rest too. You won't help either of them if you collapse." Richard sketched a sad smile. "Doctor, I just discovered that my ex-wife, whom I haven't seen in years, kept documents that could bring down one of the most powerful businessmen in the country in a safe deposit box identified with the date of our first meeting." He ran his hand over his tired face. "Rest will have to wait." The doctor didn't insist, recognizing the determination in that man's gaze. Before leaving, she added, "The police are waiting in the lobby. They said they need your statement." When Richard arrived at the elegant hospital lobby, he found not only police officers but also Brenda, who was talking in a low voice with Carl Thompson. Seeing him, she came to meet him, hugging him tightly. "How is Claire?" "And Helen?" she asked, against his shoulder. "Claire is responding well to treatment. Helen—" he hesitated. "Stable but still unconscious." Detective Anna Christina Vaughan approached, interrupting the moment. At 45, with short grey hair and a penetrating gaze, she carried the aura of someone who had seen the worst of humanity without losing compassion. "Mr. Miller, we need your official statement about yesterday's events." She indicated a reserved room that the hospital had made available. "And we also need to discuss Mr. Campbell's situation." Inside the room, Richard reported the entire sequence of events from the reunion with Helen to the invasion of the apartment. The detective listened attentively, occasionally making notes. "Victor Campbell is a powerful man," she commented when Richard finished his account. "We've had other complaints against him that mysteriously disappeared, but this time," she smiled discreetly, "this time we have concrete evidence." "What evidence?" Richard frowned. The documents Helen mentioned are still in the safe deposit box. I'm talking about attorney Marianne Costa. The detective leaned forward. She voluntarily presented herself to the federal police this morning, bringing with her a complete dossier on Campbell's illicit operations. Everything documented with dates, values, and names. A legal time bomb. Richard blinked, surprised. Marianne handed over everything? Why? Apparently Mrs. Costa kept her own set of evidence as insurance. When she learned of the attempted invasion and the premature birth of the child, she decided it was time to end the game. The detective handed him a folder. This is a partial copy of the material. The original documents are under federal custody. Richard opened the folder, coming across falsified contracts, records of payments to public officials, and, more disturbingly, transcripts of conversations where Victor Campbell clearly discussed permanently removing obstacles. With this, we got the warrant for preventive arrest, continued the detective. He was detained an hour ago in his office, without fanfare, without media spectacle, exactly how he prefers to solve his own problems. Richard closed the folder, feeling the weight of those papers as if they were made of lead. What happens now? Now the hard part begins. The detective stood up. Cases like this are rarely simple. There will be political pressure, attempts to discredit witnesses, bribery offers. She looked directly into Richard's eyes. We'll need Helen's testimony when she recovers. And mainly, we need the documents she mentioned. They may be the final piece to this puzzle. After the detective left, Richard remained in the room, contemplating what he had just heard. Brenda entered silently, sitting beside him. Carl told me about the documents in the safe deposit box, she said, taking his hand. Do you know where it is? Richard nodded slowly. International Bank, Coral Springs branch, safe deposit box, 237. He hesitated, a melancholic smile forming on his lips. The password is 150608, June 15th, 2008. The day you met, completed Brenda, without a trace of jealousy or resentment. Should we go get it now? Not without Helen, replied Richard firmly. Those documents are hers. She risked everything. To protect them. A gentle knock on the door interrupted the conversation. It was Dr. Crawford, who seemed as tired as they were but wore a small smile. Helen is awake. She's asking for her daughter. The private room where Helen was hospitalized had a view of the sea, although the curtains were partially closed to filter the intense midday light. When Richard and Brenda entered, they found her sitting in bed, visibly weak but alert. Claire. It was the first word she uttered upon seeing them. She's fine, assured Richard, approaching the bed. She's already breathing practically on her own, according to the doctors. She's strong, like her mother. Helen visibly relaxed against the pillows. Campbell? Arrested, replied Brenda, placing a small flower arrangement on the table beside the bed. Marianne handed everything over to the federal police this morning. A solitary tear rolled down Helen's pale face. So it's over. It's really over. Almost, corrected Richard gently. Detective Vaughan mentioned they'll need your testimony and the documents in safe deposit box 237. Helen studied Richard's face for a long moment before speaking again. You remembered the date. How could I forget? He smiled slightly. The launch cocktail party for the magazine where you worked. You spilled red wine on my white suit. And you said it was a sign of good luck in some obscure culture you had just invented, completed Helen, a ghost of a smile crossing her lips. Brenda observed the exchange with a serene expression, without interfering in that moment of reconnection. Helen, Richard returned to the main subject. What exactly do these documents contain? Helen adjusted herself in the bed, swallowing, with difficulty before answering. The original deed to the land in Angel Bay, with the true signatures of the previous owners, concrete proof that the documents Victor used to take possession of the property were forged. She paused, breathing deeply. And there are also recordings, conversations between him and Matthew Fontaine discussing how to permanently eliminate the former owners when they refused to sell. Matthew was involved from the beginning. The surprise was evident in Richard's voice. He was the legal arm of the operation, always was. Helen looked at her own hands, now without a wedding ring. When I discovered the truth, it was already too late. I was already pregnant. And Victor, already knew I had found the documents. And why didn't you come to me before? The question escaped Richard's lips before he could contain it. The look Helen gave him contained years of unprocessed pain. And say what? Hello, Richard. I know we haven't spoken since the divorce, but I need help escaping from my psychopathic boyfriend who wants to kill me. Brenda intervened with a soft voice. The important thing is that you're safe now, and Claire too. Helen breathed deeply, as if gathering courage for something difficult. I need to see my daughter. The doctors were initially reluctant, considering Helen's condition, but eventually yielded. In a wheelchair, she was taken to the neonatal ICU, where she could observe Claire through the glass. The little one was already showing signs of significant improvement, to everyone's relief. She has your eyes, commented Richard, standing beside the wheelchair. And her father's stubbornness, retorted Helen with a slight smile. Then, more seriously, she added, You know you're not the biological father, right? Richard nodded, his gaze still fixed on the newborn. I know, but I made a promise to protect her, and I intend to keep it. Without a doubt, you would be a better father than Victor could ever be. Helen hesitated, as if carefully choosing her next words. But it wouldn't be fair to tie you to that responsibility. You have your own family now. She looked discreetly in Brenda's direction, who was observing the scene from a distance. Richard followed her gaze, then looked back at Helen. Some responsibilities we choose freely. Claire is not to blame for the circumstances of her birth. At that moment, Richard's cell phone vibrated. It was a message from Detective Vaughan. Urgent. Campbell got habeas corpus. Lawyers claimed health problems and inadequate detention conditions. He's under house arrest with an ankle monitor, but I fear not for long. We need those documents. Now. We need to go to the bank, he announced, showing the message to Helen and Brenda. Today. Helen paled even more. He's going to escape. Like always. Not this time, assured Brenda, with a determination that surprised both. Not if we can. Help it. The chaos wasn't over yet. In fact, it was just entering a new phase, more dangerous and unpredictable. As Helen was taken back to her room to rest, Richard and Brenda were already planning the visit to the bank to recover the final evidence. What none of them knew was that Victor Campbell, comfortably installed in his mansion, had already given explicit orders to his remaining men. Find that safe deposit box before they do, and this time no failures. The late afternoon sun poured in amber tones over the bank branch in the heart of Coral Springs. Richard and Brenda crossed the main hall with deliberately calm steps, despite the urgency they felt. Formally dressed, as if they were in just another everyday business commitment, they were the very image of calculated discretion. Mr. Miller, what an unexpected pleasure. The manager approached solicitously, extending his hand. How may I help you today? I need to access a safe deposit box, replied Richard, his tone cordial but firm. Number 237. The manager hesitated, his professional smile momentarily faltering. That box is not registered in your name, sir. I'm aware. It's in the name of Helen Carter, my ex-wife. Richard handed him an envelope. Here is her signed authorization, with notarized signature, and a temporary power of attorney. As the manager examined the documents, Brenda discreetly observed the movement in the branch. Her perceptive eyes detected two men who entered shortly. After them, one wearing a poorly fitted grey suit and another in more casual attire, both with the tense posture of people who weren't there for banking transactions. We have company, she whispered to Richard, without moving her lips. Richard didn't need to look to know they were being watched. Let's speed this up. The manager returned, still with a slightly concerned expression. Everything is in order with the authorization. Please, follow me to the safe deposit box area. The safe deposit box room was in the basement of the bank, protected by multiple layers of security. With each door that opened and closed behind them, Richard felt the pressure increase. In his pocket, the cell phone vibrated silently, probably Detective Vaughan asking for updates. Here we are, box 237. The manager inserted his key into the dual lock. I need you to use your key as well. Richard frowned. I don't have a key. It's impossible to access the box without both keys, sir. It's the bank's standard procedure. A moment of panic threatened to take over Richard. Brenda, however, intervened with serenity. In the power of attorney, Helen specifically mentions that access would be via numeric combination, not by physical key. She pointed to the paragraph in question in the document. The manager reread, carefully, then nodded. You're right. This is one of our older boxes with a dual system. It can be opened by either keys or combination. He adjusted his glasses. I'll leave you alone to enter the combination. Please ring the intercom when... You're finished. As soon as the manager left, Brenda positioned herself by the door as a sentinel, while Richard faced the numeric panel of the safe deposit box. 150608, he murmured, typing the sequence with slightly trembling fingers. A soft click signaled that the combination was correct. The internal mechanism of the box turned, and the heavy door yielded under his fingers. Inside there was only a worn leather folder and a flash drive sealed in a plastic envelope. Richard took both, feeling the literal and metaphorical weight of those items that Helen had protected at such risk. We got them, he whispered to Brenda, who smiled briefly before turning her attention back to the door. They're upstairs waiting. Carl confirmed by text that we have 2 suspects in the hall and possibly a third in the parking lot. Richard nodded, putting the items in his executive briefcase. Then we'll use Plan B. Upon leaving the safe deposit box room, they thanked the manager and, instead of returning to the main hall, asked to use the secondary exit, normally reserved for employees and deliveries. It's an unusual request, the manager began, but Richard interrupted him with a rehearsed smile. I have an urgent meeting 2 blocks from here. It would be much more practical to exit through the back, considering the traffic at this hour. Richard's status as a premium client of the bank was enough to overcome any resistance. Soon they were exiting through a service corridor that led to a parallel street, much less busy than the main avenue. Carl Thompson was waiting for them in an ordinary car, nothing that resembled the luxurious vehicles of Richard's fleet. As soon as they entered, he drove off at a moderate speed, blending into the traffic. Everything according to plan, informed Carl, observing through the rearview mirror. Campbell's men are still at the bank, believing you'll use the main exit. Excellent. Richard held the briefcase firmly against his chest. Straight to the police station now. The journey took place in a tense silence. Richard briefly examined the contents of the folder, original documents with authenticated signatures, internal memos, and what appeared to be a land deed with handwritten notes in the margins. Everything exactly as Helen had described. At the police station, Detective Vaughan's team was waiting for them. A meeting room had been prepared, with equipment for preliminary analysis of the documents and secure extraction of information from the flash drive. This is pure gold, declared Anna Christina, after an hour of evaluation. We have here not only evidence of the falsification of the deeds, but also of Campbell's direct involvement in the disappearance of the original couple who owned the land in Angel Bay. She raised her eyes from the documents, and the flash drive contains recordings of meetings where he explicitly discusses murder. Richard felt a chill. So he really... Yes. He not only forged documents, he ordered the deaths of innocent people who refused to sell their property. The detective closed the folder. With this, the habeas corpus will be immediately revoked. I'll personally go to the on-duty judge with this evidence. As the detective was leaving to make the necessary arrangements, Richard received a call from the hospital. It was Dr. Crawford, his voice laden with urgency. Mr. Miller, there was an attempted intrusion into Helen's room. A man pretending to be a doctor tried to enter, but our security team detained him. Richard felt his blood freeze. Is Helen okay? And Claire? Both are safe. We transferred Helen to another room with reinforced security. There was a pause. But the intruder, he managed to escape during the confusion. The police are here taking statements. Brenda, who was listening to the conversation on speakerphone, was already standing gathering her things. We need to get back to the hospital right now. The hospital was on alert when they arrived. Police officers circulated through the corridors and additional security had been positioned at strategic points. Richard was conducted to Helen's new room, located in a more reserved wing with controlled access. When he entered, he found Helen awake, sitting in bed with Claire in her arms. The little one, who had been temporarily transferred from the neonatal ICU to be with her mother during the crisis, slept peacefully, oblivious to the chaos surrounding her. "Did you get them?" was Helen's first question upon seeing them. Richard nodded, approaching the bed. "We handed everything over to Detective Vaughan. She's already arranging for the revocation of Campbell's habeas corpus." Helen briefly closed her eyes, a deep sigh escaping her lips. "Then it's over. It's really over." Brenda sat on the edge of the bed, observing the baby with tenderness. "She looks stronger today." "The doctors are surprised by her progress," confirmed Helen, caressing the few dark hairs on her daughter's head. "They said she could go home in 2 weeks if she continues like this." The word home hung in the air like an unformulated question. Where would Helen go now? The safe apartment was compromised, and returning to the mansion she had shared with Victor was out of the question. As if reading her thoughts, Richard spoke. "I have a property in Key West that I rarely use. It's isolated, secure, and with a complete staff. You and Claire can stay there for as long as necessary." Helen studied his face for a moment. "Why, Richard? After everything, the divorce, the time apart, why do you still care?" The question hung between them, laden with untold stories and unresolved feelings. Richard sat in the chair beside the bed, carefully choosing his words. "Because some people remain important even when paths separate." He looked briefly at Brenda, who nodded in silent understanding. "And because Claire deserves a new beginning, free from the shadows of the past." A knock on the door interrupted the moment. It was Detective Vaughan, accompanied by a court officer. "The judge revoked the habeas corpus," she announced without preamble. "Campbell will be transferred to maximum security prison within the hour, and we have some additional news that you need to know." The detective entered, closing the door behind her. The recordings on the flash drive revealed much, more than we expected. Victor not only ordered the disappearance of the original owners of the land in Angel Bay, but he was also behind the car accident that left Helen in a coma 3 years ago. Helen paled, instinctively pressing Claire closer to herself. "What? You said car accident?" Richard and the detective exchanged concerned looks. "You don't remember the accident?" asked Anna Christina gently. "I remember waking up in the hospital. The doctors saying I'd been in an accident." Helen frowned, struggling to access nebulous memories. "But the details, I never fully recovered them." Richard breathed deeply before revealing, "Helen, your car was sabotaged. The brakes were tampered with." He hesitated. "For a long time I believed your father was behind it." "My father?" The shock was evident in her voice. "Why would my father do something like that?" "Because you had discovered compromising documents about his illicit business. At least that's what the evidence at the time indicated." Richard ran his hand through his hair, visibly disturbed. "But now with the recordings we found, Victor manipulated everything to incriminate your father," concluded the detective. "Apparently Anthony Carter discovered Campbell's intentions regarding you and his future business. When he tried to alert you, Campbell acted first." Helen remained silent for several moments, processing that revelation. Finally, a single tear rolled down her face. "My father, where is he now?" The detective and Richard exchanged sorrowful looks. "He disappeared shortly after your accident," replied Richard softly. "No one has heard from him since." "Until now," added the detective, her expression grave. "One of the recordings mentions a problem permanently resolved in Paradise Cove. We're reopening the investigation into Anthony Carter's disappearance based on this new evidence." The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of all those revelations. Claire stirred in her mother's arms, as if sensing the tension in the environment. Helen softly kissed her daughter's forehead, finding in that small being the strength to face the avalanche of painful truths. "What happens now?" she finally asked. "Now we begin to rebuild," replied Richard, extending his hand to gently touch Helen's arm. "One day at a time." 3 months later, the house in Key West was exactly As Richard had described, isolated, secure and surprisingly welcoming for a luxury property. From the wide veranda facing the sea, Helen watched the sun set while Claire, now more robust and alert, slept peacefully in the crib beside her. Victor Campbell's trial had begun the previous week. The evidence was overwhelming, and the prosecutors were confident in obtaining maximum conviction for multiple crimes, including homicide, forgery and obstruction of justice. Helen heard footsteps approaching on the wooden veranda. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. "The white roses you planted are blooming," commented Richard, sitting in the chair beside her. "The gardener says he's never seen anything like it at this time of year." Helen smiled slightly. "I've always been good with plants. They respond to patience and constant care." "Just like people," observed Richard, his gaze lingering on Claire. "She's growing fast. Too fast." Helen delicately adjusted the baby's blanket. "The doctors are impressed with her recovery. They say she won't have any sequelae from the prematurity." They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, just contemplating the horizon where the sky met the sea in a perfect line. "I received news from Detective Vaughan today," Richard finally said. "They found remains on Campbell's property in Paradise Cove. DNA tests confirmed. They're your father's." Helen closed her eyes, letting the news, although expected, settle in her heart. There were no more tears. Those had already been shed in the previous weeks, when the truth about her father had begun to emerge. "At least now we can give him a proper funeral, a closure." "Yes." Richard hesitated before continuing. "Brenda sends her regards. She and the baby are well. It's a boy." Helen looked at him with a genuine smile. "I'm happy for you both. You deserve that happiness. And you deserve to rebuild your life, Helen." Richard extended his hand, placing her set of documents on the table. "The land in Angel Bay was legally reverted to the heirs of the original owners, as you requested. And here's the deed to this place, transferred to your name, and a trust fund for Claire." Helen looked at the papers, then at Richard, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I don't need so much generosity." "It's not generosity, it's justice." He smiled serenely. "Besides, I discovered I much prefer my house in Miami. The sea here is too beautiful, distracts anyone from work." This elicited a light laugh from Helen, a sound that had become increasingly frequent in recent weeks. Richard's phone vibrated. It was a message from Brenda with the first photo of their newborn son. He showed it to Helen, who smiled genuinely. "Leonard is a beautiful name," she commented. "It suits him." It was Brenda's choice. Richard put the phone away. "She asked if we could visit them next weekend, the four of us." The implication didn't go unnoticed by Helen. The four of them, Richard, Brenda, little Leonard, and her, with Claire. An unconventional family configuration, born from the ashes of past traumas. "I would like that," she responded sincerely. "I think it would be good for Claire to meet little Leonard." The sun finally plunged below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of pink and orange. Claire awoke, her small eyes blinking curiously at the world around her. Helen took her in her arms, cradling her against her chest. "You know what I like most about this place?" she asked, watching the first stars appear in the firmament. "The silence. Not an empty or frightening silence, but a silence full of promises. Like a blank page waiting to be written." Richard nodded, understanding perfectly. Every great story begins with a blank page. As night fell gently over Key West, Helen cradled her daughter. Richard contemplated the ocean, and, miles away, Brenda rocked little Leonard. 4 lives intertwined by extraordinary circumstances, each finding its own path to redemption. The truth had emerged from the shadows. Justice was being done, and the future, once uncertain and threatening, now opened before them like the vast ocean, deep, mysterious, but full of possibilities. Claire gurgled softly in her mother's arms, her small face illuminated by the day's last ray of sunshine. A new beginning, born from turbulent endings. A promise that even in the darkest stories, there is always room for light to find its way. Dear listeners, just as Helen closed a chapter of her life to begin a new blank page, we've also reached the end of this narrative journey filled with emotions. As Helen and Claire contemplate the sunset in Key West, we invite you to move on to new, equally engaging stories on our channel. To complement this experience, we've prepared a special playlist with other narratives of suspense and redemption that will certainly captivate you as much as The Empire of Secrets. Find it by clicking on the icon to your left. If the story of Helen, Richard, and the dangerous secrets that surrounded them touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Every day, like the sunrise that Helen contemplates in her new life, we bring unique stories that explore the complexities of human relationships and the winding paths of redemption. What did you think of the conclusion? Which secret surprised you the most? Share your impressions in the comments below. Like Claire, each new story on our channel is a promise of unforgettable moments, and your participation illuminates our work like the last ray of sunshine of the day. We await you in our next narrative.